Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight's something different, a collection of scary stories from mediums. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My mum passed away when I was 13. Her death wasn't something we could prepare for. It was abrupt and tragic, and left a hole in my life that's never fully healed. She died in a car accident, only a short distance from where we all were at the time. The place where it happened is burned into my memory because it wasn't just some random stretch of road. It was a spot we'd driven over many times before. The ground there was gravelly and uneven, and had a bumpy patch that always made us laugh as kids when the car jolted. It was fun in the way only small children thrills can be. That's why when the accident happened, we knew she had driven over that patch on purpose. It was something we all associated with lightheartedness. She just hadn't expected the car to flip. She hadn't expected to be thrown out, or for that small moment of joy to turn into something fatal. My older brother was actually the first one to find her. He'd been walking to the store and stumbled onto the scene. I can't imagine what that moment was like for him. But for me, it has always made the entire loss feel closer and more immediate. She didn't die miles away in some hospital or on some unfamiliar road, but within reach of us less than a mile away. After she passed, my siblings and I were taken in by our aunt. She wasn't blood related, she had married our blood uncle, but she stepped up for us when our world fell apart. My mum and she had both left my father and uncle around the same time, which in a strange way tied their lives together even more. I dealt with the grief in my own way, but I was young. I was stubborn too. I've always spoken to my mum out loud even after she was gone. I believed and still do that she still hears me. It was a coping mechanism, but also a comfort. Talking to her made me feel less alone. Years later, I entered a long-term relationship that lasted from when I was 16 until 20. Looking back, it was deeply toxic, abusive, and filled with cycles of destruction and reconciliation. But at the time, it was something I clung to. When we first got together, he was basically homeless, sleeping on the floor of a trap house, and struggling with multiple drug addictions. Somehow I thought I could save him. I thought love could fix him. We had countless paranormal experiences together, things I believed were my mum trying to protect me, but that's a whole other story. Over time he moved in with me and my family. He got clean, at least for a while, but the relationship stayed volatile. We bounced between his mum's house, my aunt's house, and eventually his grandmother's because no one could handle how toxic we were together. By the end of it, I was exhausted. I wasn't even fighting back anymore. He said terrible things to me, things that chipped away at who I was, and I was so defeated that I simply absorbed them. One day after hours of fighting, I was in his grandmother's kitchen doing dishes. My safe space, if I ever had one, was always in conversation with my mum. So I stood there at the sink with tears in my eyes, heart heavy, and I started talking to her again. But that day was different. I didn't feel her presence. I didn't feel comforted. I felt more alone than I ever had, and in that moment broken down and hollow, I remember saying out loud, "I don't even know why I'm talking to you. There's no point. You're dead." And with those words, I shut myself off from her and decided I wouldn't talk to her anymore. About a week later, my aunt called out of the blue. She was bawling, clearly shaken, and told me that she had to share something that happened at work. At the time, she was working at a dispensary. Customers come in and out all day, and she was busy giving recommendations like normal. That day, a younger man in his early 20s came in with his father. She helped him find what he was looking for, and when they were done, he stopped and looked at her. He told her she had a beautiful aura. My aunt brushed it off politely, but he continued, saying he doesn't normally do this, but he felt compelled to because of her kindness. His father stood behind him smiling, almost like he'd seen this happen before. The young man explained that he was a medium and that a woman was with my aunt. He said the woman was thanking her, saying she had done something she didn't have to do, but that she was deeply grateful. My aunt immediately thought of my mum. Then he said the woman wanted to wish my aunt a happy birthday. My aunt's birthday was the following week. The medium continued, saying that the woman's death wasn't really an accident, though it appeared as one, and that she kept showing him names starting with J. All 5 of my mum's children's names start with J. He told her that the woman was showing him the name Mark. My aunt didn't know what it meant at first, but later I reminded her that Mark was my older brother's father's name. Then he described seeing a pill bottle being knocked off a table. He interpreted it as removing something toxic, and my aunt immediately thought of me and the abusive relationship I was in. Finally, he said the spirit wasn't alone. She was with a man who felt like a father figure. He described feeling a pressure on his chest, difficulty breathing, signs of a heart attack. My grandpa had died less than a year earlier from a heart attack. He suffered in traffic. The medium said they were together now. When I asked aunt where he was from, he explained he wasn't even from our state. Her dispensary was the first place he'd stopped at after getting off his flight. He told her he was booked for years and couldn't take on new clients, but he felt like this interaction was the reason he'd come. He had no other explanation. When my aunt called me and relayed the story, I was stunned. There was no way this man could have known all of that. The J names, the detail of how my mum passed, the connection to my aunt's birthday, the pill bottle, my grandpa's death. These were details no stranger could guess nor Google. And more than that, the timing. Just a week after I'd given up, after I told my mum I wouldn't talk to her anymore, she had reached out in the only way she could, through a stranger who had no reason to stop and deliver a message. I believe she did it because she knew I was at my breaking point. She knew I needed proof that she was still with me, and she was still listening. And I believe she gave me the strength I needed to leave the relationship I was trapped in. Within a few months, I finally left and never went back. Even now I think about that day and the messages that came through my aunt. I know skeptics will say it was coincidence, or that the medium was guessing, or that my aunt read too much into it. But I don't believe that. I can't. The details were too specific, the timing too exact. For me, it wasn't just a paranormal experience, it was a lifeline. My mum saved my life from the afterlife. She reached across death to save me one last time. I work at an antique and vintage store in Georgia with my coworker. Both of us are female art college students just trying to get through the summer tourist season. Most days at the shop are fun in their own quirky way. We get to see strange, beautiful objects, meet interesting customers, and soak in the odd charm of working amongst relics. But today was different. The morning started off normally enough. I get there around 11:30 for the first shift of the day, and as usual I begin the opening routine. Turn on the lights, checking displays, and preparing the register before the crowds came in. Nothing unusual at first until I stepped into the back room to plug a lamp and flip on the overhead light. The second I crossed that threshold, a heavy weight pressed down on my chest. It wasn't painful exactly, but it was so distinct it made me pause. I caught my breath and tried to brush it off. We'd all been feeling something similar in that room recently, and we had chalked it up to the construction happening upstairs. The workmen had been messing with the ventilation system, so we figured the room was just stuffy and poorly ventilated. That's a logical explanation. At noon, my coworker arrived and the day began in earnest. Being summer and peak tourist season, the shop stayed busy. People browsed, made small purchases, asked questions about odd pieces we had on display. And everything was completely ordinary until around 2 p.m. when a woman in her late 20s walked in. She seemed pleasant enough, just browsing with interest. We greeted her and let her wander the aisles while we finished with a few other customers. After maybe 5 minutes, she approached the register. Her tone was polite but cautious, as if she wasn't sure how we would react to what she was about to say. I know this is going to sound really strange," she began, "but have either of you had any negative experiences in the back room, especially near the air vent?" My coworker and I exchanged a confused glance. How could she possibly know that we'd felt something odd in there? So I answered honestly, "Not really. It just feels stuffy and kinda creepy when it's dark, but nothing paranormal, as far as we know." She nodded, slowly. Then she leaned forward a little and explained, "I'm a medium. When I went into that room, I felt a heavy negative presence. It's not just the air, it's something old, very old, pre-Civil War energy, not indigenous to America. And it told me to get out." The words sent a chill down my spine, and my co-worker's eyes widened. We'd both watched enough paranormal shows to know that phrase isn't exactly a welcoming one, and what stuck with us though was her demeanor. She wasn't theatrical or trying to upsell us on a reading. She was calm and open, even a little apologetic. She offered details, freely answering our questions without hesitation, and never once hinted as payment. That sincerity made it far scarier. If she'd been fishing for money, we could have brushed it off as a scam, but she seemed genuinely concerned. We asked her where in the room she felt the energy the strongest, and without hesitation she said, "Near the air vents." That sent another shiver through me, because that was exactly where I'd felt the heaviness earlier in the day. Before we could ask more, the shop got busy again, and she excused herself, wishing us good luck and promising to stop by again sometime to check in. My coworker and I just stared at each other after she left, both processing what had just happened. About 15 minutes later, the dealers who managed the merchandise in the back room arrived with new inventory. We couldn't help ourselves. We immediately asked if they've ever felt anything strange in their space. They didn't even hesitate. "Yeah, since we brought in the last batch of items a few weeks ago, we felt constantly drained, physically and emotionally, every time we walk in." That got our attention, and we pressed further. What had they brought in recently? And they pointed to 2 objects, both sitting right by the air vent. One was an old African hand-woven tapestry, its threads faded but still intricate. The other was a European death mask, stark and pale, and unsettling even without a story attached. Both were from the 1800s, if not earlier. The second they identified those pieces, everything clicked. The timing lined up perfectly, the heavy feeling starting after those items arrived, the medium pinpointing the air vents, the overwhelming sense of negativity tied to the very corner in the room. It felt undeniable. We told the dealers about the medium's visit, and they didn't laugh it off. In fact, they believed it wholeheartedly. By the time closing up rolled around, my coworker and I were rattled. We'd both grown up watching paranormal stuff, enough to know that disrespect or fear can sometimes make things worse. So we did the only thing we could think of. We spoke out loud firmly but respectfully, saying goodbye to whatever was there and asking it to stay in this store when we left. We avoided talking about it much, not wanting to give it more energy or attention. Still, it hadn't left my mind all evening. The weight in that room, the drained feeling the dealers described, the specificity of the medium's words, it all felt like it was too much to ignore. That's why I'm sharing this with the story fresh in my mind. What should we do? We don't want to provoke or disrespect it. We don't want to challenge it. We just want to stay safe. Because right now, I can't shake the image of that tapestry and the death mask sitting by the vent, radiating something old and angry, waiting for the next person who dares enter that room. When I was a child, my family began to suspect I knew things I shouldn't. It started when I was just a toddler, too young to understand death, let alone speak about it. My mother and aunt were dressing me to drop me off at my father's workplace so they could attend a funeral. They hadn't told me who had died. They hadn't even spoken the name out loud. But as they tied my shoes, I looked up into my aunt and said calmly, "Tell George I say hello. He knows now he'll be missed." George was the man who'd passed away, a car accident violent and sudden. I had no way of knowing, but they never forgot that moment. It chilled them. That was the first sign. We were a big family, 8 of us under one roof, in my grandparents' old house. It was always alive with noise and laughter. And one night, we were all together watching a comedy, passing around drinks and snacks and just enjoying each other's company. And then I saw him. A tall man passed by the front porch window. He was dressed in all white, his face was pale, chalk white with deep hollow eyes, and something like vines or black stitches sealing his mouth. He wasn't walking, he was gliding. I turned to my grandmother and asked the question that froze the whole room. "Nana, who's the man with the sewn mouth?" They all looked outside, but there was no one. The porch lights came on, the street light was already casting shadows, and there was no sign of any man. My uncle made a joke to brush it off, something about Hello Kitty's dad. But my mother had gone pale, because she knew it wasn't the first time either. As I got older, my aunt began talking to me about something we call Mesa Espírita, a spiritualist church where mediums offer messages of comfort and healing. I was around 6 or 7, just a kid waiting in line to be spiritually cleansed, when a new person, someone who we hadn't seen before, replaced the woman organizing the children. He was tall, blonde, and freckled. He looked right at me and my aunt and said, "Won't you give me a hug, Maria?" I hesitated, tightened my grip on my aunt's hand, but he insisted. "That's not how you give a hug. Give me a real hug, Maria." I gave in. I hugged him like I knew him, and somehow I did. When we came out of the session, we searched for him, but no one had seen him arrive, and no one had seen him leave. The woman who left for the bathroom swore she hadn't asked anyone to take her place, and the people behind me in line never saw him. My aunt still believes it was her brother Marcelo, who had died 5 years before I was born. She thinks he came back for a moment just to hold me. But the story that haunts me the most came the day my mother died. She had battled cancer for 9 brutal years. She was fierce, strong, but on the 9th of February she lost her battle. After that I was completely silent. For 3 months I hardly said a word, no laughter, no crying, no anything. My father took me from doctor to doctor to search for answers, but none came. Then on May the 9th, Mother's Day, I woke up at my stepmother's house. Something compelled me. I picked up a tulip, my mother's favorite flower, even though there was no one around, and handed it to my stepmother and told her about a dream I had. I said I saw my mum, lying on the same stretcher she died on. An angel stood beside her. She looked at me one last time, hugged me, said goodbye, and was taken away. Hours later, my father woke me up in tears, showering me with gifts and affection. They never told me exactly what I'd said that morning, but I felt it. I remembered the warmth of her arms around me and that overwhelming grief and peace. From that moment on, I began to accept what I was, and I decided that if I had this gift, I would use it. Because I now know, some things are never really truly gone, some doors never really truly close, and sometimes the dead aren't done talking. I don't often share publicly, but as a practicing medium, I wanted to share something deeply personal and sacred that happened about a year ago. It's one of the clearest validations I've experienced of how spirits communicate before transition and how often they reach out to those they trust will listen. During a meditation, I received a message, unmistakable, that my sister would be passing soon. It was shocking. She was still in her 30s. healthy, active, with a beautiful life, a young daughter, a great job, no illness or red flags of any kind. But my intuitive system is something I've worked with for years. When that kind of message comes through in the meditation, it doesn't come from fear or ego. It comes through me, and I listen. That same day, a specific date lit up in my awareness. I couldn't say why, but my gut knew it meant something. Later, I read 10 weeks, in a totally unrelated context, and my stomach sank. I counted the date of my meditation to the day that kept flashing in my mind, and it was 10 weeks away. From that point on, the energy in my home changed. Unexplained noises started up, sharp, deliberate ones that pulled even my skeptical husband into checking the doorways at night. He's always been supportive, but not really into what he calls my woo-woo world. My daughter, usually a solid sleeper, began waking up at odd hours. My bed, specifically my side, would depress in multiple places in the middle of the night. Not like tossing or turning, but like someone was sitting there. It didn't feel threatening. If anything, it was familiar. One of the strongest validations happened the very next day. I had lunch with my sister, and she casually mentioned how unusually deep her sleep had been the night before. She was baffled by it, but I wasn't. In the weeks that followed, I smelt cigarette smoke constantly. No one in my home smokes, and I couldn't trace it to anything. My sister was a smoker. It was her scent, her signature. Spirits often use smell as a calling card. And 10 weeks after the meditation, she passed. Not suddenly. There were medical complications, but she was gone quickly. And spiritually. I knew from the very beginning that she had asked me to help her guide her through this. It wasn't just a warning. It was an invitation to hold space, to witness, and to walk beside her in the only way someone attuned to spirit could. Since her passing, the activity has calmed down, the smell faded, and the bed no longer shifts. I think her transition to what's next is complete. I think she came to me so that I could help hold her light through the process. If you're a medium and you've ever received a pre-death message, or you've been invited to someone's transition by their spirit, I'd love to hear your experience too. There have been a few weird things in my life, but nothing quite like what happened at the home of a former boyfriend. For some context, strange things would happen in that house from time to time. Nothing terrifying at first, just odd and hard to explain. Once, while I was in the shower, a comb that had been sitting on the sink flew through the gap in the curtain, like someone had thrown it. There was no one else in the bathroom, no windows open. It was just me. My ex and I felt like something was a little bit off about the place. The air would feel heavy some nights, especially in the hallway. You'd catch shadows moving just outside of your peripheral vision, and there were cold spots that would drift across the room like someone walking past you. At first, we laughed it off and joked the house was haunted. But after a few months, we started taking it more seriously. A friend of mine at the time had a cousin who was a medium. She wasn't a ghost hunter, didn't wear robes or chant. She was just a normal person. She didn't even want to come when we asked her over, but after some back and forth, she agreed. The night she visited, nothing felt unusual at first. She walked slowly through the house, her hands occasionally hovering near the walls like she was trying to sense something. Then she stopped at the far end of the hallway right outside the bathroom door. "She spends a lot of time here," she said. "Who?" "The one who waits. She thinks you're ignoring her now." That chilled me. Because just the night before, my ex and I had been talking about how quiet the house had been lately. We had joked that our resident ghost must have moved on. The medium wouldn't go into much more detail. She said the woman felt resentful, like she'd once been noticed and now had been forgotten. She's not angry, but she's starting to feel invisible. She left soon after that. I thought about it all night. A few days later, I was home alone and couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Out of a mix of boredom and curiosity, I sat in the living room and tried to speak out loud to whatever might have been there. At first, I was respectful, but when nothing happened, I started joking, speaking into this silly high-pitched voice. "Oh, no one pays attention to me anymore, so I just don't do anything." I thought I was being funny. Later that week, I mentioned it to the medium over the phone. I told her about the voice and how I was messing around. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "That's exactly what she said to me." "What?" "Nobody notices me anymore, so I don't do anything." Those were her exact words, but she didn't sound like you. Then she added, "You shouldn't mock her voice. She mimics." That word mimic stuck with me. I didn't tell her this part, but I had recorded myself during that little mock session using my phone. I went back and played it later, and during the part where I was joking, there was a moment where a voice overlapped mine, not after, over it, and it said it very clearly and drawn out. The worst part? It sounded exactly like me. When I played it for my ex, he couldn't even hear what I was talking about. He thought I was just pointing out my own voice. He swore up and down it was me. I don't have the recording anymore. It was on his phone and we split long after. But that night, it stuck with me. Even sharing this now makes my eyes swell up. I don't know if his parents still live in that house, but if they do, I hope they're careful with what they say out loud. My mother called me today. She had scheduled a phone call with a well-known medium in our town. I don't believe in mediums. I believe they are masters of cold reading and extrapolation on some things one says. But I listened out of politeness and respected my mother's belief without belittling her. Before I relate this story, I must tell you about my brother. He's 34 years old, 5 years younger than me. About 2 years ago, he turned his life around, studied to be an electrician, and was working in that field and seemed to enjoy it. My brother is a very secretive person and has a hard time opening up to us and letting us know about his life. I let him be, but our mother nags him constantly, worries about him too much, and sometimes he gets fed up with her about it. So it came as no surprise to me that when he pivoted his short electrician career to drive semis instead, he didn't tell her about it. He feels as if she will worry even more about his financial situation, and he doesn't want to worry her needlessly. So my father and I are the only ones who know about him being in school right now, out of town, 3 hours away, to learn to be a truck driver. My mother still thinks he works as an electrician. So back to our story. My mother tells me about her phone call with the medium. The medium had asked her to prepare semi-vague questions without naming any names. My mother's relation with them, and basically the least amount of info possible. The medium told my mother about a few things about our family. A lot which was quite spot on. Me working too much, having no social life. She spoke about my mother considering gastric bypass surgery, which I've been asking her to talk to the doctor about, and a bunch of small interesting things that could fit what we were going through as a family. But the best bit was when my mother asked, "Is my son happy?" The medium told her, "Your son is going through a career change right now. I see him driving something much bigger than a pickup truck. I see trees, a forest, and dirt roads. We live in a remote area where wood trucks haul wood from our forest to the US. She told my mother that this is where my brother would find happiness. Now my mother still thinks he works as an electrician, but I know this isn't the case. And this woman, unknown to us, being so spot on, gave me chills. I wouldn't call myself a medium. Honestly, I don't believe in most of that stuff. I've always considered myself rational, but for as long as I can remember, strange things have happened around me. Things I can't explain, which I've tried to dismiss, and yet, no matter how much I rationalize, the memories never leave. Part of me has always wondered if I'm crazy. Another part of me thinks there might really be something following me, or maybe running in my family. To start, my mum was the same way. She had visions, dreams, feeling about things before they happened, and I used to roll my eyes and think she was just dramatic. When she first moved into her house with her fiancé, she told me she kept dreaming about snakes, dozens of them everywhere. She told me about it, saying she didn't know what it meant, but maybe it was a warning. I brushed it off. Dreams are just dreams. A few nights later, her fiancé got up to use the bathroom. He stepped on something soft and squishy in the dark. When he turned the light on, there was a snake right under his foot. Animal control came, and when they checked the attic, they found an infestation of snakes living up there. My mum just looked at me afterwards and was like, "See? That's the first time I started to wonder if maybe she wasn't crazy." My mum was also artistic. She used to draw constantly, filling sketchbooks up with strange symbols, faces, and images. And one thing that came up over and over again was an apple. "Don't bite the apple," she would tell me. Snow White bit the apple and fell asleep. Eve bit the apple and everything changed. Don't bite the apple. It became almost like a mantra. Near the end of her life, she said it more and more. At the time I thought she was just being cryptic. Mums can be like that. Then she was hospitalized, slipped into a coma and never woke up. For a month she lay there, her body still alive but her mind elsewhere. I can't shake the connection. She warned about the apple putting someone to sleep forever, and that's how she died, falling into an endless sleep. Maybe it was a coincidence, but maybe not. And it wasn't just her. My family has a history of this. My great-grandmother, days before her death, said my great-grandfather, who had been dead for years, was coming to visit her. "He's coming to get me," she told everyone, and she passed soon after. My dad once collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest, and said something was wrong with our cousin. Within the hour, he got a call that our cousin had been killed in a car accident. So maybe it isn't just me. Maybe it's just our bloodline. When I was around 3, I felt something I couldn't explain. My mum and I were driving when we passed a terrible accident. A semi had crushed a car underneath it. The wreck was mangled so badly you couldn't even tell what kind of car it was. Without hesitation, I screamed, "That's Auntie." My mum tried to calm me. No, it's not. You can't even see who's in the car." But I kept insisting I knew in my body it was her. When I got back to my grandma's house, the phone rang. My aunt had been in a wreck. She'd gone under a semi. It was her. When I was around 10, I went with a friend on a family trip to upstate New York. They lived in a small community like a family compound, with houses close together down a back road. The first few days were fine, but one night we all sat outside by a bonfire, sharing ghost stories. The air was crisp, the fire crackled, and the woods loomed dark and quiet around us. That's when I saw it. Up in the second-story window of the house, a figure stood looking down at us. I pointed it out, but when everyone turned to look, there was nothing. Every single family member was accounted for outside. I told myself I was imagining things, but a few minutes later I saw it again. A shadowy figure, unmistakably watching. The family got annoyed at me for bringing it up, but later my friend pulled me aside and whispered that she saw it too. She said she didn't say anything because she didn't want to be laughed at. We left the next morning, but I couldn't shake the image of that figure in the window. Valentine's Day 2014, and I was in middle school. That morning our teacher gave us a fun word scrabble. We had to make as many words as possible from Happy Valentine's Day. The first words I came up with were death and die, over and over. When I got home from school, ambulances were outside my house. My stepfather had died suddenly from congestive heart failure. To this day, I don't know why those words jumped out at me. When I was 14, my great-aunt's longtime boyfriend died of a heart attack. Years earlier as a child, I had once asked them why they weren't married. I'll never forget the look he gave me. The air in the room changed, and I felt something dark, almost evil, radiate from him. It was the last time I saw them before his death. Afterwards, while helping my aunt pack up her house, she pulled me aside and said, when he was dying, he told her that if anything happens to him, to not let your great-nephew into the house. That word chilled me. That night I dreamt, or maybe it wasn't a dream. I couldn't move, like sleep paralysis, a dark figure hovering over me screaming, "Get out!" It raised its hand and struck me across the face, and I woke up with a burning pain. When I went to the bathroom, I could see a gash on my face. I told no one. We moved again when I was 16. The house was big, clean, and felt perfect. During the showing, we weren't allowed in the basement as the door was locked. When we moved in, we cut the lock. Inside on the wall was a black pentagram and a letter. The letter claimed the previous tenant had been dabbling in witchcraft and had opened something she couldn't close. We painted over it, but no matter how many coats, the symbol kept seeping through. At night, I'd hear footsteps running in the hall, cabinets slamming, children giggling, and pictures falling from the walls. We brought in a priest. Without us mentioning the pentagram, he went straight downstairs as if something drew him to it, and he blessed the house. And things calmed down for a while. One weekend, my whole family went on a trip, but I had to stay behind for work. That night I lay in bed with my dog at my side when I noticed a corner of the room was unnaturally dark. My dog's head shot up. She growled, then snarled, foaming at the mouth like she was rabid. She lunged at the darkness and I flipped on the lights, but nothing was there. I tried to sleep again, but the growling started again, and I grabbed my pillow, fled to my car, and slept there. When I looked back at the house, my window was pitch black. I never stayed in that house alone again. I live in an apartment now. It's safer, with people around, but I still feel it sometimes, the heavy watching presence. Do you think it's all in my head? I still find myself trying to rationalize everything, with no one to turn to who would believe me or would think I need to be locked up in an asylum.
I've always leaned more towards believing in the supernatural, though I don't buy into everything. My wife, on the other hand, has always been a complete skeptic, until recently. A few days ago at my wife's workplace, a woman who claimed to be a medium was chatting with my wife's co-worker. As my wife Claire happened to walk past them, the medium suddenly froze, her eyes locking onto Claire's with an eerie intensity. "I'm getting a Daniel from you," the woman murmured. Claire stopped dead in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. Daniel was the name of her son, her baby boy who had passed away at 4 months due to a birth defect nearly 9 years ago. It wasn't a name she spoke aloud, not to me, not to anyone. And the timing. This was the very month he had passed. I wasn't there when it happened, but I know Claire never talks about him. The weight of his loss is something she carries in silence. Then the medium spoke again. "Your grandmother. Your mother's mother. She's cradling him, she's holding him close." Claire's grandmother had passed years ago. Maybe that part was just an easy guess. Something anyone could assume, but the name sent a chill straight through her. And this woman, this stranger, wasn't asking for money. She wasn't advertising her services. She had simply been struck with a force so strong she couldn't keep it to herself. Claire came home different that night. The skepticism, the resistance, it had cracked just a little. And for the first time in years, there was a quiet peace in her eyes when she spoke about Daniel. Maybe it was all just coincidence, maybe it wasn't. But something that day shifted, and neither of us can shake it.
I think it's a little important to mention that my late grandmother, from my mother's side, used to communicate with the dead, usually her family members. She saw them in dark windows of her apartment, or received messages from them in her dreams. They were always outside, never coming in, so there was always the barrier of glass between them and her. Once she proved it definitively by telling the living members of the family about a letter that was about to be delivered from the government. Grandma told them precisely what it would include, and this was pre-internet times, and she was very specific. She told me once that some part of our family comes from 2 Belarusian children saved during the war by traveling gypsies, and they learnt their craft and passed it down, but less and less with each generation. No one really knows the details of their ancestry anymore. Other than that, Grandma was able to predict someone's passing, either via dreams, in which she saw the teeth of said person falling out, or by a precognition brought by some little dark spirit she was never able to confide more about. She described it as a small black ball, passing through the floor of the room. I am way younger than my siblings, so she never spent much time with me. She did with my siblings though. One time she took my sister somewhere, I'm not sure where. I'll have to ask her, as they were maybe riding a bus. Anyway, my sister was able to tell my grandma the whole story of that place, from the perspective of someone who lived there. My earliest memories come from the time when I couldn't have been older than 2. We used to live in a flat in one of those post-communist Poland apartment buildings, tiny rooms, old Eastern European carpets, etc. Often I would wake up lying in bed and hear voices speaking. That on its own isn't weird. The walls were thin, but it was either family members who could not possibly be there, or ones who were sleeping in the same room and lying silent. Yet their voices were calling me from behind the wall. Same goes for our old dog. He would sleep with me in bed, but I would hear his specific bark from somewhere else. As I grew older, it continued to happen from time to time. I have a memory from when I was around 4 where my parents told me it was just from the apartment next to ours, and not to worry. I was little, so I didn't find it scary, it was just odd to me. At that age, I also had a weird recurring nightmare, a toy that fell down like a shooting star and appeared in our home. It was a doll that somehow rode like a car, and could not climb. Her touch was burning my skin, so I would climb onto the counters and tables to run away. That one I really thought was just a nightmare up until 2025. When I was 5, we moved to our current home. We are the second owners, but the first ones never lived here and didn't even finish the house. The voices followed. Now I was sure I could hear people that were not inside the house. Also, there were those little noises like if mice or rats were behind the walls and furniture. I know it sounds cliché, but that's what I heard. Things were giving out those little cracks way too often, especially when I was trying to go to sleep. I often ran to my parents to tell them about it, but they always shrugged it off, said it was in my imagination, or that birds might be landing on the window or roof outside my view. Or just, it's normal, go back to sleep. When I was 7, I saw a shadow person or shape, shifting slightly like a lava lamp. I wear strong glasses, and was without them when I woke up from an after-dinner nap and noticed it. But there was no other explanation for anything else possibly standing in the middle of my room in the afternoon, tall, black as void, and moving slightly. I was so scared I couldn't even squeak, so I hid under my covers until someone came to wake me up. And as soon as the door opened, I jumped from that room. It never happened a second time. Around that age, I also discovered that I could tell when a dream was actually a dream, and force myself to wake. For a couple of years, it was the tapping, cracking, usual stuff. I learned to play with it a little. If I couldn't sleep, I would whisper, "Play the piano." And slowly I would hear some quiet piano music. We had one in a different room. I'm not sure why, but I never tried anything else. Perhaps I was too afraid. When I was around 12 in the early 2000s, I started to explore heavy music, metal, goth, punk subcultures. I devoured anything outside of the Christian views because I was starting to hate the church we were attending, to see the deep-running hypocrisy, and I gulped down ghost stories, horror books, everything, to be honest. I was kind of used to having nightmares, or dreaming weird things. I thought it was cool, because I learned how to lucid dream because of that. It didn't always work, though. Waking up was still easy, but changing the world without it turning back into a nightmare was difficult. A few months later, something weird started happening. Often in the morning, as I was leaving the house, I would have this persistent thought. Which parent would I prefer to die? I remember this well because I had a diary where I would put all the weird thoughts and ideas, teenage stuff that I wrote about there, marking the dates. It's important you know this happened before October 2007. I didn't decide, but quietly deep inside I always picked my mum. By the time, she was depressed, sometimes aggressive, in yelling, though I've seen her slap my adult sister and throw stuff, rarely walking outside, smoking, and reading romances in a small unfinished bathroom in the house. My father was a workaholic, but I loved spending time with him, and he never raised his voice and was always kind and fair. Then I started to dream almost every night about dying animals. There were always cats, dogs, many of them. They were inside my house and I would either find them dead in my dream, or they'd die as soon as I touched them. Some months after this started, my mother began appearing in those dreams. She would always run away from those animals screaming. And then, they would run at her. I would wake up crying as soon as I could. It was terrible. And then it happened. October 2007. My father woke me up in the middle of the night. The paramedics were already there. He told me to pray and return to the police downstairs. We didn't find out what the cause was. She started to choke in the middle of the night, but her airways were clear, so they wrote the cause as a heart stroke. She died in the house before they could take her to the ambulance. I never saw her that day, really. My father didn't let me. The furthest I could go was the stairs, and from there I just saw her pale feet on the floor. I never got to say goodbye. The coffin was closed. The funeral seemed unreal. The tapping and the cracking and the voices went away. Nothing ever showed itself in the house, though my grandma told me to be careful, because she had a dream of my mother coming for me to take me away. She didn't wear her usual clothes in that dream, but a grey/green cloak. Sometimes I could see her in my dreams, always quiet and never really moving. I could ask her a question to which she would nod or shake, but she didn't always want to answer. As a late teen, I tried a few seances, spells and such. Nothing much happened, really. We used to have sleepover parties in the woods, and I got lost during one. It was way past midnight and I couldn't see anything. My phone stopped working, and I prayed to anything and everything so hard for it to shine some light, just a little bit, so that I could find my way back to the others. And it did. For a minute the screen went white. It never ever did, just this once, all white and bright, then dead again, and I found my way back. Years passed. I'm 31 now with a husband and 2 kids. We live with my dad in the same house, saving up to build a new one on the land we bought a year ago. Life's good, but nothing ever happened again. Grandma died a few years after my mother, though she was pretty adamant that one of my sister's daughters is her next reincarnation, and many things might prove it to some extent. Characters, days of the month, births are the same, and more. Though, that's a whole other story. Not really mine to share.
My dad has always had paranormal experiences. He's told me countless stories, but this one steals the spotlight. I'm Emma, 25, born in March 2000. That date matters because my grandfather, who lived in the same house my dad and I still do, passed away there on March 20th, 1999, exactly a year before I was born. To make things even stranger, my mom was told she was infertile, yet about 4 months after my grandfather's passing, she found out she was pregnant. When my mum was about 7 or 8 months along, my dad was away for work in a different state. On a whim, he decided to stop at a random hairstylist salon for a trim, somewhere he had never been to before. As soon as he sat down, the hairstylist studied him for a moment before asking, "You got a baby on the way, don't you?" My dad hesitated. Yeah, how do you know?" And she gave a little smile. "It's a girl, right?" Now he was really uneasy. He had only found out the gender the day before. "Yeah?" Then she sighed, like she was about to tell him something serious. "Listen, don't panic, but there's gonna be a complication when she's born." My dad immediately tensed. "What do you mean? What kind of complication?" "The umbilical cord? It'll be wrapped around her neck, but don't worry, she's gonna be fine. He's protecting her." My dad's heart nearly stopped. "Who's he?" She looked at him knowingly. "Your father." That's when she started saying things about my grandfather, his name, the legal troubles surrounding his will, even warning my dad not to let his siblings take the house. My dad never mentioned any of that. Then she casually dropped my mum's name into the conversation. At this point, my dad was speechless. "How do you know all of this?" "I'm a medium," she explained. "And your mum's here too. She and your father are bickering just like they used to." She chuckled and mimicked their conversation, quoting their words exactly. By then, my dad was completely overwhelmed. He let her finish cutting his hair, paid, and walked out in a daze. A few months later, I was born, and just as the medium had said, I had a complication. My umbilical cord was wrapped around my neck. But just like she said, I was completely fine. There was no logical way she could have known all of that. And the strange occurrences didn't stop there. My grandfather passed away in our house, sitting in his favorite rocking chair in the corner of the living room. He smoked cigars every day. And ever since I was about 4 years old, my dad and I have occasionally smelled cigar smoke in that exact spot. No one in our house smokes, and even if they did, cigars have a very distinct scent. Dogs always bark at that corner of the room, and sometimes when I walk through the house I feel a sudden chill run through me, and on a few occasions I've heard a voice whisper my name. When I listened to old recordings recently, I realized it was his voice. We also recently got a kitten. The first time we brought her into the living room, she walked straight over to my grandfather's ashes, curled up and fell asleep. And ever since he passed, a robin has regularly appeared inside our house, just sitting there, no matter how much we try to move it. It's always the same robin with the same marking. I've even seen it follow me from our house to different parts of the country. There is no logical explanation for any of this, but one thing is clear. He's always keeping an eye on me.
Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. What did you think of this video about mediums? I have a few stories left, but I would ideally like to do this topic again as I found it really interesting. So I'm saving those for a future installment. But give me your thoughts to see how soon you'd like that. And with September upon us, I have some interesting things in store, so be sure to stick around. Huge thanks as always to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen, and if you would like your name on the end credits and a bunch of cool perks, follow the links on screen, in the description to find out more. But that's it from me. See you on Sunday for a new compilation, and on Tuesday for fresh content. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.